I'll tell you what my father started doing. So what he started doing was he started making. He had a still in his basement, and he started manufacturing plum brandy. It's called Tretchkenbrofen, plum brandy. It was in that area. There was a lot of empty fields, and there was with the wheat and with you can make your own. He made a still. He had a still. He went back to his.
By the way, what was his identification at the time?
The war was a little bit. 1945 in Romania, the war was over already. Anyway, so my father was in business, and he also started a little business. There was nothing was really formal because there wasn't formal life right after the war. Things were in flux. The communists started taking over Romania, which Krasno was part of at the time, and probably still is today. And that was his business. He would sell it. He would also sell it to a lot of Russian soldiers, because Russian soldiers, liberated Romania. So there was a Russian camp nearby, near Krasno, and he would sell liquor to various people, including the Russian soldiers who would love to come to him. But it was sort of like bootleg. It wasn't official. Don't forget, there was no liquor stores or Walmarts that you can go to and get liquor or groceries or anything like that. But it was a business, and it was sort of like, it wasn't a licensed business because they didn't really gear up after the war like that in 1945-46 to go ahead and be sort of like have licenses. So finally, in sort of like the beginning of 1947, like 2 years later, the Russian soldiers Russian authorities, the communist authorities, were after him because of a few reasons. Number one, he was selling liquor, and you weren't allowed to be in business for yourself. Communism meant that you had to be. All businesses were owned by the state. And any enterprise was owned by the state. You had to be appointed. You had to be a member of the Communist Party in order to be any sort of official or any sort of head of any business or factory or anything like that. Plus, he was selling. So number one, he wasn't a member of the Communist Party. There was some anti-Semitism, still latent anti-Semitism in the area. He heard that a cousin of his was killed. Cousin Reuben, one of the Reuben cousins were killed because, they were Mandela at the time, because he was undercover and we used to kill Nazis or Hungarian sympathizers. But anyway, getting back to the bottom line, the Russian authorities were after him because he would sell also liquor to the Russian soldiers in the camp, sort of illegally. So they wanted to arrest him, and he had heard finally that they're going to arrest him, sort of in the beginning of 1947. And then they decided that they were going to leave. They were going to leave Romania, and they're going to go back to Hungary and go to Germany. They had heard that there was something called DP camps. There was displaced person camps where the refugees went when they were liberated from the concentration camps, and they came from the work camps, and any Jews that were refugees. And from there you could apply to go to either the United States or it was easier to go to Israel. But the United States, you could get a visa. But meanwhile, in the displaced person camps in Germany, mostly, you were able to go to register in these DP camps that you're a refugee, that your parents, that you were survivors, and then you could get on a visa to where you wanted to go. So people even went to Argentina, South America. But most of the people, so they decided that they wanted to go, but and then they had heard about my father wanted to get arrested, so they were packing actually that day to leave, and they had arranged with the man that they were going to be able to transport him over the border illegally into Hungary, and they would go back to the cousins, and from there, from Hungary, to go to Germany. So one day, all of a sudden, as they were packing, the day they were actually trying to leave, the Russian authorities finally caught up and finally figured out where they lived, and they knocked on the door. And they knocked on the door to my parents' house, and they said, "Where is Moses Hyman? Where's Moshe Hyman?" That was his name then. He was Hyman still. It was Hyman, and his father was Hyman. His family name was Hyman. And they said, "Where's Moshe Hyman?" And my mother right away realized what was going on. And he was in the back room packing, my father. And my mother said, "Oh, he just left now to deliver 10 cases of liquor to the Russian camp, to that Russian soldiers' camp that's about 10 kilometers away." And they said, "Really? He just left?" And they scooted out and they left. And they left him because they were looking for him. And meanwhile, they realized that they finished packing real fast. So they took whatever they could, and they left the house immediately within the hour right after that, because they realized if they go back, they'll come back again. And it was very quick-witted of my mother to say that, but that saved their lives. And then they went into this train. They quickly got on to the train station, to the city where the train station. They waited to the train station in Krasnodar to take them west into Hungary. Now, even if you didn't, in the train station, in order to go from one country to the next, they lived about 30, 40 kilometers from the border. But when you got off that train, you took a train, you had to show your visa to get into the next country when you got off the train. But they didn't have a visa to get into Hungary at the time, and this is in 1946, early 47, and it was a different country. So they made up with this guy who they paid, who was to smuggle them across the border, that they were going to take a night train, and that when they would know before the train stops at a certain station in Hungary, that they would, as soon as they crossed the border, they would the train would toot a few times, and then they would know to jump off. And he supposedly had a horse and wagon for them to get them across a river. But what happened was, luckily, it was like a full moon and the skies were clear, because what happened was, when the train tooted, those toots, before they got into that village that they were supposed to get off, where he's supposed to have his horse and wagon, when they were supposed to jump off, if they would have jumped off, it would have been a big ravine and they would have been killed. It was a big valley. They would have jumped into a big valley with a little stream on the bottom, like a gorge, and they would be killed if they would have jumped off over there. So that was another miracle, that it was a full moon and they didn't jump off. But what they did was they waited and they saw when there was land, and they jumped off there. And the guy wasn't there with the horse and wagon, and they were cheated. And they had to crawl underground to be undetected from the border guards, because even after the war, people kept their borders and didn't.
They had to crawl on fields.
On fields.
With their suitcases.
With their suitcases to get to their cousins, in Hungary. And from the cousins in Hungary, they would be able to, stay there for a while and then get to Germany, to the DP camps. So they got to the cousins, and finally, surreptitiously, and then they were being searched because they heard that there was some Jewish refugees across the border, illegal aliens that were coming into Hungary, and they were going to get arrested from the Hungarian authorities. And they came to my father's family hid them in. They had they lived near a farm, and there was like a hay truck, a truck full of hay, but not and it was like packed with hay, because hay for the horses and for the animals that they had, and they hid them under they heard the authorities were coming, so they hid them under the hay truck. And my parents remember that they had pitchforks looking in the hay, and they couldn't get to the bottom of the forks. And then my cousin said, "Oh, they were, you missed them. They left a few days ago." And so they pitched the fork a little bit, they pitched their forks in the hay truck, and they looked for them and they couldn't find them. Then they got out and they paid somebody off and they smuggled them into the border of Germany. Once you were in Germany, Germany was completely conquered, so it was either Russian or the American side. So in 1947, it wasn't really, it was easy. There wasn't like this Berlin Wall separating Russia and Germany. The Americans, British side, the West Germany and East Germany wasn't separated yet. And they were able to get to the DP camp